Thomas here with Much Props, going to give you another how-to video. Today I am building something Krampus related. Now if you're unfamiliar with the folklore, basically think Santa Claus's opposite, where Santa rewards the good boys and girls, Krampus punishes the bad boys and girls. And I thought it would be fun to build something relatively easy, and it gives me an excuse to put some rust on a Christmas decoration, which is not a lot of occurrences. I wanted to kind of approach this build a little bit differently. I'm going to tell you in the first clip basically how I make the entire thing, and then for the rest of the clips I want to go ahead and do like a little folklore story, kind of like what I did with the jack-o'-lantern origin story. So without further ado, today we are making a Krampus Bell out of EVA foam. Let's get to building. I decided to start this build out with a sketch to get the general game plan for the build, using various references from Google searches. I'm going to make my bell all out of foam so it won't be functional, just a prop. I have some thick leftover chunks of 48mm EVA foam that I'm going to use to carve half domes out of with a sharp box cutter, then sand over the rough edges with a rotary tool, and finally glue them together. Then it's just a matter of adding on various layers of details, wood burning on runes, writing, and adding the slits to the bottom of the bell. The bell at the top has the words Groß vom Krampus in German, which means greetings from Krampus. The runes at the bottom are Elder Futhark and symbolize joy, gift, man, and game. The paint job is pretty simple, with a rub and buff of ebony and a touch of silver, and then at the end a dusting of Vallejo rust effects sprinkled on the top and held in with Mod Podge. Before you listen, understand that it's not a story meant for comfort. What follows comes from an older winter, one that did not forgive and did not forget. Names were lost, warnings were ignored, and some legends survived because they were never meant to fade. If you hear bells while this tale is told, do not assume they are part of the story. Before winter was dressed in lights and warm music, it was something else entirely. A season that stalked the living, thinning herds, breaking homes, and teaching people which mistakes could not be made twice. In the high alpine valleys, where cliffs close in like ribs and the forest drinks all the sound, the people believed the cold was not empty. They believed it watched from the dark, patient and deliberate, waiting for the year to weaken. And when the nights grew longest, when the sun barely rose before sinking again, the cold sent something to walk among them. They spoke his name carefully, as though the sound alone might summon him to them. In a faint whisper, Krampus. He did not arrive as a man arrives, nor was he born into the world. He emerged from an older age, one where spirits were not distant ideas, but neighbors, judges, and executioners. Krampus was shaped by famine and fear. His horns curved like roots of dead trees, his hooves split the frozen ground with every step, and his body carried the smell of wet fur, ash, and old blood. Snow did not rest on him, it melted and ran, as though his presence spoiled the land itself. His face was something the mind resisted remembering. A mouth twisted too wide, filled with cracked teeth worn down by time. A tongue that hung heavy and knowing. Eyes that glowed faintly, not with flame, but with recognition. And if he knew exactly who you were the moment you saw him. Some believe he was the offering of hell, sent up from the cold halls beneath the world to claim what wandered too far from the rules. Others said he was older still, a punishment given shape when the worlds first learned how easily humans forget the cost of survival. Krampus did not roam at random. He came only during the deepest stretch of winter when the sun felt distant and thin, and the space between the living and the dead grew narrow enough to tear. You never saw him first, you heard him. Chains dragging behind him, heavy and deliberate, carving lines through the snow, and woven into his form were bells. Dull, iron, rusted, and uneven, their voices cracked with age. They did not ring in celebration, they rang in warning. Parents taught their children to listen for that sound, because when the bell became clear enough to count, hiding no longer mattered. Krampus carried birch rods, cut from living trees, their pale bark still bearing the memory of sap and pain. He struck not to kill, but to carve lessons deep enough that they would never fade. And for those who could not be corrected, for the cruel, the defiant, the ones who would not learn, he carried a basket strapped across his back, woven from wood and shadows. The story says it never emptied. Those taken into it were not found in spring. No bodies, no graves, only silence where names used to be spoken. When new faith climbed the mountains and pushed old spirits into the dark, Krampus became something dangerous, too ancient to erase, too feared to be ignored. They named him Demon, outlawed his likeness, and burned the mask that once kept him at bay. But fear does not disappear when forbidden, it sinks deeper, waiting. So they bound him to St. Nicholas, forcing light and shadow to walk the same road. One offering reward, the other ensuring consequence. Winter would never be gentle again. Even now when the years collapse inward and the night stretches thin, the old ways surface. In alpine villages, masked figures still walk during Krampusnacht, dragging chains through fog and letting bells echo between two walls. They call it tradition, but traditions are just memories that refuse to die. This is something else the story mentions only in fragments until the end, when the voices grow quieter. Krampus does not always take everything with him. When the snow retreats in spring, bells have been found where nothing else should be. Half buried beneath melting drift, split open by cold, their iron swollen and scarred. Discovered deep in the forest with no path, no churches, and no reason for bells to exist at all. When lifted, they do not ring clean. They moan and shudder, as if remembering weight and motion long after being stilled. Villagers learned to leave them where they lay, not to melt them, not to hang them, not to test them, because each bell marked a step he took, a judgment passed, a soul removed from the world. And then, one winter, the bell stopped appearing. The elders said that this was not a relief. It was worse, because silence did not mean Krampus was gone. It meant he no longer needed warning. I was never the obedient child. I knew the stories my parents warning about the forest at night, about winter spirits in the long nights, but I ignored them. The rules felt like chains holding me back from the rush of the dark, the thrill of stepping where no one dared. Each time I snuck past the cabin, past the warmth of the hearth and caution, I felt in a way daylight could never grant. The first venture into the forest was an innocent curiosity. The trees loomed like silent watchers, the snow softening my step, the night holding its breath. I laughed at my parents' fear, thinking the shadows were empty, but the deeper I went, the more I felt eyes watching. Not human, not animal, but something old. And always in the story, there was St. Nicholas, the kind, benevolent man who rewarded the good, the obedient, those who listened and acted with care. I dismissed him. I thought he was a distant figure, irrelevant to mischief I pursued. But the truth is, St. Nicholas and Krampus are two sides of the same coin. The saint rewards, but the shadows wait. Every act of cruelty, every lie, every defiance, every rule broken, the light notices, but the shadow acts. With each night I ventured further and further, testing the limits. I ignored paths that I was told to follow. I mocked the small children, hid their toys, laughed at their fears, hoarded what was meant to be shared. The thrill was intoxicating. I felt untouchable. I felt invincible. And then one night I heard it. A faint, uneven jingle carried through the trees like a heartbeat. Krampus had been watching. Every disobedient step, every cruel trick, every thrill of the forbidden, it had all drawn him closer. St. Nicholas may have seen the good, but in that moment, I realized the shadow was stronger, faster, and merciless. It was not unlike any other common night that I was sitting in bed, wondering what to do with the rest of the night as I couldn't sleep. So I took a look out the window and the night called. I don't know why, but I disregarded all of the thoughts in my head saying St. Nicholas would not approve. I should have stayed inside. I knew at the moment the night grew too still, the wind too quiet. But curiosity, or foolish pride, drove me out into the forest, where the shadows grew long and alive. At first it was subtle, a pressure in the air like cold head weight pressing against my chest. The trees themselves seemed to lean away from something moving between them, and then I heard it, a faint, metallic jingle, uneven and off-key, carried on the wind. A bell, impossible out here, and yet it called to me like a heartbeat I could not ignore. I froze, listening, my breath frosting in the air. The jingling grew louder, closer, interspersed with scrapes of something enormous across the frozen earth. Hooves, claws, I couldn't tell yet. Then I smelt it. Rotten fur, ash, ice, a stench that made my stomach twist, yet rooted me to the spot. And then I saw him, a shadow, tall-horned, melting out of the darkness, his eyes glimmering faintly like dying embers. The bells on his body rang with every step, but each toll was distorted, hollow, and deliberate. Chains dragging across the snow and the stone, and that basket swaying behind them as though it had its own awareness, its own hunger. I ran. The snow stabbed my knees. My lungs burned. He followed, silent but relentless, moving faster than he should, soundless between each bell. I stumbled and fell, and the forest seemed to close in. The bells jingled closer, each note a heartbeat hammering against my skull. I could feel him, smell him, hear the rasp of his breath as he loomed over me. I grabbed a fallen branch, thick and splintered, and swung blindly. It struck something solid, a grunt, low, guttural, and he staggered. But it wasn't enough. He came again, a living nightmare, twisting through the trees like shadows made flesh, claws slashing, horns grazing the branches above. I fought with everything I had, swinging branches, kicking at hooves, clawing at the basket that loomed like a predator itself. I felt the weight of him pressing into me, his power, his age, his hunger. I stumbled backward into a frozen creek, ice cracked beneath me, and then in the chaos, I remembered the bells. One jingled right beside me, dislodged from his suit as if he had lost it in the struggle. I snatched it up, cold, heavier than iron should be, rattling violently in my hand. It was proof that he was real, proof that I had survived. Krampus froze for a moment, snarling his eyes, burning through the night. Then as quickly as he had appeared, he vanished into the shadows, leaving only the echo of metal and the forest that seemed to sigh in relief. I stayed there until the first gray light of dawn, cradling the bell, too shaken to move. Even now, when winter comes in and the night stretches long and quiet, I feel him watching. And sometimes, if I listen closely, I hear the faint jingle of iron through the wind. So listen carefully. If you ever hear bells where no one walks, where no wind can carry sound, do not follow them. And if you find one in the snow, leave it. Because legends do not leave behind proof unless they expect someone to survive. I used to believe monsters were created to frighten us. Now I know that they were created to teach us when teaching was the only way to survive. Krampus did not come for the innocent. He came for what we allowed ourselves to become. The lesson of Krampus is not found in the chains or the horns or the bells. It lives in the silence after the sound fades, because a world without consequence does not become kinder, it becomes careless. And winter has always punished carelessness first.
And we are finished. It is all rusted up using a different thing than normal. I've used spices, I've used chemical treatments. This time I used some Vallejo dust effects, and I really like the way it turned out. It kind of gives it that nice little grit. And if you wet it down and kind of solidify it on there with some watered down Mod Podge, it definitely changes the variations in colors and clumping, which is kind of cool. So yeah. Maybe you will try and make one of these yourselves and impress your friends with your ability to make some rusty, ugly, crusty old bell and scare little kids into being good. Yeah. Maybe you'll get some.
Yay!
And inevitably, they're going to ask you, how'd you make that? If you give them one of these, tell them, much props. I guess I'm just going to go scare people into being good for Christmas. Peace out.
If you enjoy what I do here on YouTube and you want to see more builds like this one, please consider joining these awesome people listed here with me over on my Patreon to build a bigger, better, more creative community together.